A couple of your epigraphs to chapters are from George Orwell, and you cite in the endnotes, I think you say that, the politics in the English language is like
Mm,
the text that you would assign students if you could assign them,
yeah.
one thing to help them understand. And and of course, Orwell's whole politics in the English language is concerned with the use of euphemisms and the way that how we talk influences how we think and what we understand. And he
Yes.
talks about he talks then because it wasn't new certainly about how ethnic cleansing could be justified as
Yeah.
just a population transfer if
Population
needed.
transfer. That's right. Yeah.
And all the kind of language, and reading that today, it doesn't seem to have dated very much. It's just new euphemisms. So
Absolutely.
tell us a little bit more about how the way people talk about things is sort of helping them in the process of that rationalization that you mentioned, because you're exploring how people rationalize being part of this system.
Yeah. Well, we already talked about one of in fact, a couple of the big ones. Probably the biggest is the replacement of the word military, certainly the word war, but also the word
Mm,
military with the word defense.
mm,
It's everywhere. And in fact, every now and then I'll tweet to a left-leaning journalist, would it make sense to stop calling this defense spending or
mhm,
defense budgets and just start calling it military spending and military budgets? I think military is a much more neutral term. It
mm,
interests me that the more accurate terminology here would be to
mm,
say, for example, the U.S. government is now going to allocate $1 trillion taxpayer dollars to the military. That's where it's going.
mm,
Defense is unclear. I actually don't think it's for defense. I don't think anybody needs this level of money for defense. It's nuts. But defense is an alleged intention. It's actually going to the military. Why don't you call it what it actually is? Well, because it's propaganda. That would be one instance. And another one that's been around for most of my adult lifetime, as far as I know, is the word intervention
mm,
as a preferred term to describe America's invasions and
mm,
bombing campaigns and occupations, that sort of thing.
mm,
If you think about it, intervention is a fairly friendly word. It's something
mm.
you would do with a friend who's developed an
You
alcohol or other
you
drug
you know
problem. Yeah, you get the
we
family together.
someone
Yeah,
needs to intervene to pull the parties apart. They started it. We don't start stuff. We just intervene in stuff.
exactly.
That's
Just to help, to in our beneficent way, because our intentions are always good.
mm,
So interventions is another one that consistently interests me, and there are so many others. The use of the phrase enhanced interrogation techniques
oh
rather
yeah.
than torture. And I remember Chris Hayes saying, and I wouldn't call myself a fan of Chris Hayes exactly, although maybe he's doing the best you can do if you work for MSNBC. But he said this is like calling rape non-consensual
Mm,
sexual intercourse. It's just
mm,
like, what are you obscuring here?
mm,
That was another one that's quite obvious and that I find pretty disturbing. I think there's some reference to another one I came across in the book, the surge in
mm,
Iraq when the surge was announced. That's another one that I thought about.
mm,
I'm like, why the surge? Here's the thing you'll see in the book, and that I always imagine. These things are presented, and we don't really think about where they came from. For the first time, I remember when the surge was announced, the natural word, the organic one, the one that would be on the top shelf of your mind, most easily acceptable, I think, would be the tried and true escalation. That's what we're doing. We're sending 30,000 new troops into
yeah.
this war. We're escalating. I mean, that's just what it would obviously be called. And I can imagine the marketing meeting. And again, I think the way to understand these
Mm,
things is to think about a marketing meeting. They've got a product. It needs to be packaged. It needs to be positioned in the marketplace. And the brand name and the product name are going to be very important. So somebody said, all right, we're going to 30,000. We should, the president will write the speech and he's going to say, we need to have an escalation. And then somebody said, no, that's not good. Well, how can we call it a temporary escalation? Nope, no good. That's everybody's going to think Vietnam. It's open-ended. It's a quagmire.
mm,
And they tried a few different product names. And then somebody said, I got it. Bear with me
mm,
here. Listen, the surge.
mm,
Think about the surge. What does that conjure? The surge, the ocean tide surging up onto the beach. And what happens? What happens when the ocean surges onto the beach? What happens right afterward? It goes back out to the ocean. It's temporary. And it might even clean up some of the detritus, some of the seaweed shells, whatever's on the beach, just sweeps it back into the ocean, cleans off the beach. It comes in and then it goes out. And everyone said, "Oh, I like it."
This novel is so rich with different themes. We haven't even we talked there about euphemisms, about idealism meeting the realities of power. You have the media is covered in the book. There is a people will see echoes of Julian Assange and Edward Snowden in parts of the book. But one thing I wanted to eh, one theme that I wanted to discuss with you was you cite at one point Dr. Strangelove, and
Yeah,
I've written an article about Dr. Strangelove. One of the things I think that film captures so well is how things in a military context that are objectively insane and suicidal
mm,
can come to seem rational and necessary. And you have a Curtis LeMay like character
yeah,
in your book, and a part of the book is about the US developing new capacities for AI controlled nuclear weapons, which is something that you think about it for a minute and you think that's dystopian and horrifying.
yeah,
And I think you note in the end notes that after you wrote the book, the very
yeah,
capacities that you were talking about are in fact, under serious consideration by the US government. But
yeah,
one of the things that you were sort of exploring in the book is the way that when everything we do is done because we have to do it in order to beat China to it, because if we
yeah,
don't do it, they'll do it first. And if it's all for our national defense, we can end up rationalizing and justifying things that
absolutely.
seem at first glance to be totally ludicrous and homicidal madness.
Yeah. That's another thing that interests me, akin to what we were talking about. What happens to an idealistic politician who enters the system and starts compromising and rationalizing and getting closer to accruing more and more power? As a result, what happens if you're in an environment where these things are discussed in a way, viewed in a way that ordinary people just wouldn't understand them? I mean, if you say that this is a moment I enjoy in the book, I don't want to spoil anything. I will just say that Lance Thaddeus, my Julian Assange character, I find him hilarious in how he's almost driven crazy by the shit he is uncovering,
Mhm.
and what um, what he says about the notion of combining nuclear command and control with artificial intelligence. And the person he's talking to says like, this can't be true, and he says, how could it not be true? If a species that's crazy enough to develop one potentially extinction event technology, nuclear weapons, and then
Yeah.
another one that's artificial intelligence, how could they not try to combine them? What's the worst that could happen? It's just two great tastes that taste great together. And he starts riffing on this. And I'm like, he's like, besides which, where do new technologies always get deployed first? The porn industry and war, always. Sex and death, Eros and Thanatos. So, of course, they're
Yeah.
putting these two things together. And I wrote this before I came across that article. And then I
Mm,
came across the article and I'm like, yeah, the military is really doing this. Of course they are.
mm,
Thaddeus was right. So I think it's an interesting question. What happens to the people inside these institutions? And some of them have come forward, by the way. For anybody who's interested in this, and it's a bit depressing to read, or even worse than depressing. Annie Jacobson has a book. It must have come out about a
mm.
year ago, I think. It's
Oh
called,
yeah.
yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It's called
Nuclear war
Nuclear War.
scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, Nuclear War Scenario, and it is just a phenomenal book. Albeit, if these sorts of things keep you up at night,
It's
I
a
don't know
hard
that I
read.
can. It's a hard read. It's a very hard read. And one of the things she talks about is one of the guys who I think he was involved in the hydrogen bomb project, and he was struck by how antiseptic it all became, throw weights and yields and blast radiuses, and how
Mm,
many millions of people would be killed instantly, how many would die later. People were just talking about it as though they were, I don't know, talking about traffic patterns using spreadsheets.
mm,
And I think the human incentives when you're inside a system to adopt the rules of that system. And this is, of course, true for excuse me, tribes too. we're wired pretty well to understand what the tribes expect, what they'll tolerate, and what they'll reject and punish. And we start trying to conform to the expected behavior. That's just part of the humans. And the only defense I know is to try to be as non-tribal as you can be, to try to be aware of the phenomenon. I have to say, if anybody's interested in this topic, there's a guy I know named Paul Graham, and he writes some of the best essays I've ever read. One of them is called Keep Your Identity Small. I remember first reading it years ago, and I hadn't articulated it the way Paul does. He writes terrific essays. I would say current affairs level quality writing. Um, Keep your identity small. It's got some very good advice. Once you start to identify with an in-group, a tribe, or whatever, it motivates you, whether you realize it or not, to stop dispassionately trying to get the most accurate understanding you can and to start defending the in-group becomes your primary motivation. And that's a dangerous thing if you prize accuracy.
Daniel Ellsberg, who worked as a nuclear war planner at the Rand
Hmm.
Corporation in the early 60s, in his book, The Doomsday Machine, recounts this as seeing this document that
Yeah.
was for the president's eyes only. And the document was that was the plan for all-out nuclear war against the Soviet Union. And, it tracked the number of expected deaths, and it was, 300 million within, about a month. Um, and he recalls his reaction was that this is a plan for a genocide
Yeah.
that would dwarf the Holocaust. He's like, this document shouldn't, he says something like, this shouldn't refer to anything that is real
Yeah.
in the
That's right.
world. This
That's
this
right.
should be in the realm of fiction.
Yeah.
And knowing that it's a real plan, that the weapons are real, was so disturbing to him. Um, and he felt like a sane person in a world that had just gone completely insane. But within this institution, somehow a
No, it
logic
made
had been
sense.
constructed whereby
Yeah.
these things made sense. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
I think if you think that deeply inside the box and forget everything else you know,
mm,
then it starts to seem to make sense. I think that might be when they
mm,
came up with the term omnicide. I might be wrong, but
mm,
and so genocide wasn't enough to describe what was in these documents. And by the way, this is the thing, as I get older and I hope I learn how better to persuade people, what are better tools of persuasion.
mm,
Um, I try not to just directly get people to conclude things. Instead, I try to give them
mm,
what I think is an accurate and useful framework, and then they can plug in their own values. On this kind of stuff, what I would say is a lot of times I think the US government is doing something that to me it's crazy, or at least it sounds crazy. And many times people will say, that's crazy. They would never do that. And I don't want, what I say is, well, if you think about it, any country, any humans having control of nuclear weapons, that is already crazy. We're
mm,
just so used to it that it doesn't really seem crazy anymore, but it's crazy that we would build and deploy potentially species-ending technology.
mm,
So this is a version of, I think it's called the Dun Krueger, whatever it is, the phenomenon where you have some expertise in a certain area and you
mm,
read an article in the newspaper and because of your expertise, you realize this article is just filled with inaccuracies, errors. It's
mm,
bullshit. And then you turn the page to the next article which is on a topic you don't know that much about, and you're back to thinking that everything you're reading in the newspaper must be true. You don't really learn the lesson that if
mm,
X is bullshit, Y might be bullshit too. So when I look at these things, I'm like, look, if the US government is willing to do an extremely crazy thing, then why do you think it would only be crazy thing X? But no,
mm.
come on, they would never do crazy thing Y. They do crazy things. We know this now. It's proven. So it's not impossible that crazy thing Y is also on the table.
But like I say, because you're a novelist, one of the nice things about doing this through the medium of a novel is that you really get to think, okay, but what does this thing that looks crazy, what does it look like on the inside to the people? Who are the humans? What is motivated? Because every
Yeah,
every system is ultimately at its base made of people. Those people have emotions, they have desires,
right,
they have, reasoning processes. So what is going on among those different people? From the outside, we might just see, oh, well, AOC was inspiring at point one, and at point two, she's
right.
doing things that seem to me to be disappointing. But what is actually going on in the mind of someone that could take them from point one to what point two, which is why I say that this has a value as a piece of sociology as well as a novel, because it's really important if we're going to dismantle a system of power, to understand, what are the different pressures, and they go beyond um they go beyond legal pressure or financial pressure to emotion. I mean, one of the things I like in the book is the way you weave in people's personal relationships as being really important. You're not just writing a story that is a pure political drama.
Thank you. I mean, it's this novel. All there's no novel that I would say is easy to write. I don't want to
Yeah.
overstate. It's not like digging a ditch, but you really it takes a certain degree of discipline, and it's not like it's always fun. But it's rewarding because it combines so many of my interests. And again, anybody who looks at the epigraphs, footnotes,
Mm.
and influential works listed at the end of the book is going to see that you could argue, obsessed, I think, would be too strong a word, but I wouldn't get in an argument about it. I'm very interested in in political stuff. If I could
Mm.
go back in time, I think I would have gone I would have journalism would have been what I would start with instead of law, and I like to think I would have wound up as a novelist anyway. So this sort of stuff really interests me, but storytelling and stories
Mm.
interest me also. Obviously, I have a bit of a knack. I hope I do. I think I do. I suck at a lot of things, but I'm a pretty good storyteller.
Yeah.
And so to be able to use that one tool, like I can tell a story, but to bring the politics in too, and I'm always thinking about these things. Sometimes people say, "What happened? What happened to this or that journalist?" And in my experience, often nothing happened. You changed. The
Mm.
zeitgeist changed. This person's doing it. And Glenn Greenwald to me is, by the way, the premier example of this. I've been following the guy for, I don't know, since he had a blog called Unclaimed Territory, close to 20 years, something like that, 18 years, I don't remember. And I don't see a lot of difference in his position. Some differences, but as you would expect for anybody who's been spending the last couple of decades writing on politics. But basically, he's been against war, he's against censorship, he hates hypocrisy. I see consistency there, but the left has changed a lot in the intervening years. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the left was anti-war, or what was called the left, whatever, and against censorship, and there have been dramatic changes in that regard. So if you've changed and you look at the person who hasn't changed and you say, hey, whatever happened to you, but that is something I think about a lot when I see someone who has changed. We were talking about AOC. It really intrigues me. What happened there? I don't think most people are bad. I think it's
Yeah.
lazy thinking to just, oh,
Yeah.
that's a bad person. And I think it's actually dangerous in some ways to think that way because it gives you a false sense of immunity. Oh, that could never happen to
Right.
me.
That's right.
Well, if you're
Evil people do
human and
evil
it happened
things.
to
Good
another
people
human,
don't
you're
do evil things.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And because this keeps coming up, not on purpose, and I don't benefit from it unless it helps other people. I just get a good feeling from that. But in the various interviews I've been doing in connection with the release of the book, I've been mentioning this wonderful short YouTube video called "Are We the Baddies?" You know what I'm
Oh
talking
yeah, this is
about?
a
Yeah,
fantastic. I love this. This is Mitchell and Webb. Yeah.
it's genius. So I don't know
Yeah.
those guys. This is the only thing I've ever seen. And for anyone who doesn't know it, you can just
Yeah.
find it. Just Google "Are We the Baddies?"
Yeah.
And what it is a short skit. It's two Nazis on the Eastern Front in World War II, and one of them has this nagging sense that he can't seem to shake. And it's, well, are we? I keep thinking,
But
are we the baddies, and the other Nazi. And he starts presenting his evidence, and it keeps getting worse. You know what I'm saying? So, and go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, actually, I read a
The connection
very
broke up a little.
um I wrote a big article about the Vietnam War, and in one of the Vietnam War memoirs, testimonies that I read, a soldier in Vietnam recalled saying at one point, or hearing one soldier say to another, "We're the redcoats, aren't we?" Which was like an identical situation where he had this sudden revelation that his role, using the stock of analogies that he had, he went, wait a second,
Yes.
I'm the
Yes.
British in the
Yes.
American Revolution.
It's it's extraordinary because again, a Martian would say, how could you fail to see that?
Yes.
And I think the answer, and again, this is the kind of stuff that interests me as a novelist, is because we're so wired to see ourselves as inherently good. I remember Ken
Mm.
Burns summed up his 10-part documentary on America's war in Vietnam by describing it as a tragedy. And I
Mm,
think that's very interesting. It's hard for me to
mm,
imagine that an American scholar would describe the Soviet Union's invasion and occupation of Afghanistan as a tragedy. It's
yeah.
just not a word we would use. We think of things as, the children sheltered in that school when the hurricane was bearing down on the town, and unfortunately, the
Mm,
hurricane or the tornado, it took a certain path, hit the school, and three children died. That's a tragedy, no
mm,
question. That's what you call a tragedy. A human planned, intervened, extremely improbable sequence of events that result in an invasion and occupation with 500,000 troops of a country that most Americans had never heard of on the other side of the world. That's just not like a hurricane
mm.
or a tornado or anything else. It's not, whatever else you might want to say, it's not a tragedy. I mean, to call something like the Holocaust a tragedy, that would be very strange. It was
Yeah.
planned
It's a
and
crime.
implemented. So, yeah,
But
so
we
it's our
get drawn
enemies.
into wars. We don't
It's
wage wars. We get
always,
drawn in.
always drawn, we get drawn in,
Uh,
sucked in, pulled in.
yeah. Hope you're enjoying this interview. If you want to listen to full-length current affairs interviews before they are made fully available to the public, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/current affairs and become a supporter today.